So we're recording.
Okay. Hello, I'm Doug Wegman, along with Carl Brown, representing the Oley Valley Heritage Association. It is Tuesday, October 12th, 2015, and we're here to interview Jane LeVan, widow of Ray LeVan, and Ellie DeLong, widow of Eugene Keehn, on their thoughts and memories of the Oley Valley. You're on.
Ellie? Well, I lived my first 19 years in the Oley Valley on a farm. It's set up on a knoll. We looked down a half a block to the Manatawny Creek, and another half a block was the trolley road ran. It all ran through our property. And they missed mentioning the station there. It was a stop between Friedensburg, now known as Oley, and Pleasantville, midway, and all the people from Lobotsville and the area came there to get on the trolley at that station. It was called Clauser's Crossing. And my grandfather would take in their buggies or horses, whatever transportation they came with, and he had a special place with a watering trough where he could tie their animals and water them and that till they returned from the trolley. It was an interesting place because, and I traveled on the trolley alone. We knew the conductors real well, and my parents would put me on the trolley and I would go to Pleasantville where my other grandparents lived and get off there. But there were so many different things in the valley at that time. A lot of people were still traveling with horse and buggies. There weren't a lot of cars yet at that time. And the roads were all what we call dirt roads. And you went up into the village, and the houses there, the road was very rough. I seem to remember going up there with my grandmother, because most of the people only had coal oil lights at that time. We did not. We had electric and heat and everything. But you would still see buggies tied up, and there were always tales of some of the older citizens, noted ones in the village that had their horse and buggies. Because you would see them go with them, and it seemed strange later in years, not then. It was a common thing. And then later years, as time went on, we started getting bus transportation with what was called the Murphy Bus Line, which was actually housed down in Pottstown. And that became the means of transportation for the village people to go back and forth to Reading. And they ran a fairly good schedule. We went to Stony Creek, and there you got a shuttle bus from there into Reading for shopping and that. But there were a lot of things. The school opened. I would have gone to a one-room school, but my parents kept me because the consolidated school was opening. As happened with most of my classmates, had been held back for the consolidated school, which was a very, very nice school. Very good teachers, and it became well known in the community. At first it was just Oley, and then when the Ruska Manor, Alsace, and the Pikeville students became in 10th grade, then they joined Oley School because they had no high schools. And the school was very active. They had a lot of good sports teams. They were noted for their sports teams, and they had a very good band in the early 40s that won a lot of regional concerts, and they competed in a lot of different things. the other thing we had at school was what they called a field day, early in the April usually. And sometimes it was rather cool, but we all donned what we called our gym suits. Lovely things to go out and take part in sports. But then there were also literary contests, spelling, math, storytelling, and poems and different varieties. And we got nice little, I still have mine, we got nice little pennants for prizes. And for the little school it was, they had really come up a long way with what they participated in and what they provided for the people of Oley.
Is that the school that the fire company's at now, or location-wise?
Yes, that was the fire.
Well, yes, there were two. There was, at the time, the grammar school, they called it, had been sold and remodeled when they built the big school. And then the high school, which later was a supply building for my father-in-law. He had bought it, had a garage in the bottom, and then later the fire company purchased it. But the original fire company was across the street where I lived in Oley.
Right.
And it was just a small fire company. It was a gathering place for the elderly men in the village. And there are many, many stories that came out of there. At one time, my son and I had decided we might write a book about it. But
Now the Boy Scouts are using it.
We'll wait till everybody's
Yeah.
dead before we start the
yeah, no, they're not about you people. It's about the old stories of the old people. Oley had some very interesting, we call them characters. The Oley people were great people, but they liked their privacy. They did not like, as they always called it, foreigners. When people from outside settled in Oley, and Jane can vouch for that, it was a little difficulty, even in the schools, because it was just an odd feeling that I think probably came through the Pennsylvania Dutch line, because the majority of them were Pennsylvania Dutch.
Well,
Myself.
I think one of the things is they had enough social, when new people came in, they needed friends and needed to know, where things were and information to assimilate into the community. But the people that were here were satisfied. They had enough friends and family that they didn't need anybody else.
Well, and they weren't open to new ideas at first. You know that.
Yeah.
Because you know from
Yeah.
all the clubs and things that were in there.
Yeah, well, and I said, I can remember when we tried to start the PTA, the people,
Oh, yes.
the school board was very much against having anybody coming in and telling them what to do and how to do their job.
Yeah, that was a struggle when we did that. And there were a lot of things that, and yet, both the Lions Club, the Women's Club, they all did a lot for the community. They were, even the starting of the Oley Fair, which was another interesting thing when that was started and how it was done. But
Well, what amazed us, the same people belonged to the supervisors were also the fair officials. They were the fire company, they were the school board and the
Oh, yeah.
supervisors, the same, they just changed hats, but they run everything.
yeah, they did.
It hasn't
but then-
changed that much.
But then, Jane, you will remember, because both our husbands were on the water company. When they started that,
Well,
the-
it
some of
started
the
on
new-
our property.
yeah, and some of the new people then were taken in, I'm going to put it that way. And they started using new people more, but it was kind of a tight, back in the old days, what I really remember, it was a tight community, not easily, we're going to say, broken into, because that's
Well,
almost,
it was more or less isolated. Of course, during the war, well, we didn't move down there until '53.
yeah.
Now, so I can't give you any background as far as growing up there.
Mm-hmm.
But after the war, and I can remember, we had dirt roads when I came down there,
Mm-hmm.
in the school, and down Oley Way, I just happened to bring this up. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this or not, but then I think what I'm going to do there, the Women's Club and Heritage reprinted a lot of these things.
Oh, did they?
But
Yeah.
there's Eileen Deschamps. She was from Kutztown and connected with the newspaper there. And she went around with Mr. and Mrs. Geis were her mentors in the valley. They took her around and she interviewed. And what you're trying to do is give this little people. Carl, you probably know about this. I don't know if there's any Browns in here or not, but I think I'm going to give this to the Heritage Association because it will probably tie in with what you guys are trying to do. There's an interesting thing, Doug, you'll be interested in this one on the Udry Mansion. As I know, you live back by Oley Furnace and you might want to read that. But the thing that I remember most were the roads. When we first came down there, we came down from Breezy Corners, you came down through the Fry Road. The 73 wasn't through at that point. And then that opened up a lot of things when you could go across 73 directly. All the roads that were there before were kind of windy. And when you came down from Breezy Corners, Fry Road continued over the Pricetown Road. And that road you could get through, it would come past Winter Bottoms and down to Hefner's farm. And, but the township abandoned it, and it grew over, well, people didn't like it. It was a shortcut to get to Oley Furnace, but the people that lived on that short stretch, it's still not paved back as far as back where the Winter Bottoms live. The one thing about we talked the other night a great deal about the roads and how they changed, but one thing I think people have forgotten about is the tree in the middle of the road. And a lot of people think, when they think about trees in Oley, they think about the sacred oak. But I think the tree in the middle of the road is one thing that was very instrumental in developing that area. Of course, it's called Oak Lane now. And when the school board, not the school board, the Harrisburg said they had to pave all the roads that the school's buses went on. So they came down to pave the Oak Lane, and they said, there's a tree in the middle of the road. It's always been there, because there were 4 properties came together at that place, and they kept the oak tree for a marker. But of course, the state did prevail, and they had to drive around one side of it. Then the tree did die. But the Heritage Association put a monument with the history of the Oley tree in the middle of the road. It's alongside the road on approximately where the tree was, not in the middle of the road, but on the side. And I think people should know about that. What else did we talk about? Because we
Had a lot of different.
well, how things have changed for different youth. The fire company now, the youth building. And when we talk about the youth building, I think of old Mr. Geis, Newton Geis, who was...
Well, the Mr. Geis, which I knew very well, he was our Sunday school superintendent, and I worked with him for many years. Mr. Geis and Mrs. Geis did a lot for the community, but Mr. Geis especially. His heart and soul was with the Boy Scouts, and he did everything he could to promote that. One thing I remember most about him is they collected newspapers, and he would go himself with his car, so the boys would put him in the trunk. And he went whether there were boys with him or not. He collected those newspapers.
Every Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, he came and picked up my boys, and they had a tractor trailer behind the,
Yeah, that was
The
later
alley.
on, and yeah.
and they used the money, they filled the trailer with money, with newspapers, and used the money to send the boys to a Boy Scout camp out at
Yes.
Philmont.
And the ones
Yeah,
that,
unfortunately, they never had any children of their own, but she was a campfire leader and he
Yes.
was a Boy Scout.
right,
And he, to the end of his life, he was devoted to his Boy Scouts.
he was, and they also, a lot of people didn't know this, but they provided further education for a lot of, I'm gonna say underprivileged children in Oley, where there was a need. They reached out to the community. There are always a lot of people in a community, elderly people when we're younger that we're looking at, that do a lot for the community that no one realizes what they're doing. There was a family called Stair. The father had been a minister, and the two, his two daughters were spinsters. The other daughter was married to Charlie Glace, who had the store in Oley that was a famous mercantile. And they did a lot on the side for things. One was a professor at Ursinus, and the other one was a dean at another college. They were two quiet ladies, but they did their little work behind the scenes, I'm gonna say.
Well, they were true Christians in that respect.
Oh, yes.
They did things that they didn't want to be told or congratulated or
Right,
for the.
yes. And they also loved children. My son played up there in their yard when he was little a lot. Some people are touchy, and we had some widows that the children hadn't dared get near their property or they were in trouble, where they welcomed the children into their activities.
We also talked a lot about the different restaurants and the characters. The hotel at the inn at Oley, and Nelda.
Yeah.
I used to call her behind her back Blackie. She had her hair dyed just coal black.
Well,
This is Nellie Bossler.
Yes,
Okay.
and every morning she passed my place on her way to the hairdresser to get combed. When she went down, she had a bandana on her head, and when she came back, she was all fluffed up. But she too was, a lot of people mistook her because her name is associated with the hotel. But she too was a generous woman and did a lot of things that people didn't realize.
What amazed me, the Oley Lions Club met at the hotel on Monday nights, and she cooked. She ran the bar. She did the kitchen. She didn't have any help. But the first time I went down there, before they even sat down, their dessert, the pie was at their place, so she didn't have to run around between the
Yeah,
courses.
she did almost all except her friend Mart. He used to help her too. But she served excellent meals, and she could make a steak and a hamburger, especially a hamburger, like nobody else. And she was known for that. And then, of course, we talked about Glace's store. Down at the beginning of the town, early on, there was another store called Bachman's. And there were actually 3 general merchandise stores in Oley. And Bachman's was a small store, but the one thing I remember about that one was he had those old-fashioned cookie tins that you lifted the lid, all the cookies were loose, and that was one of his big things, the cookies that he had. And then later on, a man by the name of Sheraton bought it. After that, Stocking bought it, and after that, it was no longer a store. Then up at the other end of town was
Easter.
Bowers, and then it was Bowers first, yeah. And then Heaster bought it out, and they had the store at the upper end of town. but Glace's was the one that survived the longest in the town. And then there was a knitting mill, and there were several other, actually there was a big hall called Rhodes's Hall, where they had forms of entertainment and dances and things.
Where was that?
That was next to the hotel. I forget what they called it. Later on, a knitting mill went in there.
Well,
Oh,
then,
right.
the guy that, the chairman that
Oh,
had
Ernst,
the,
yeah.
made the letter hose and.
Yeah, he was in
Ernst Lick.
the,
was
in the
that
bottom
film.
there,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, do you remember, I was trying to remember the name, the guy that had the Victor Tool Company.
Yeah, all right.
And I know my husband was looking for one of the machetes that he was during the war. And he hunted all around and turned to find out that Victor Tool and Oley was the maker.
They were
of
making them. My father worked for him for a while. After he left the farm, he was to take over his father's farm, and he was allergic to the animals. Very serious allergies. And for a while, he worked up there for, was it Ersham or?
Ersham, that's in Maine.
Yeah. And he, in fact, he made a lot of the little kits and things that they used during the war.
For the army.
Yeah, those knives that opened up, and a lot of things like that.
Well, that's what this tool, that it's just a small, it was like a hand. He sold a lot to Cuba because they used it to chop down the sugar cane.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a machete,
Machete, yeah.
and one of my boys still has it.
Yeah.
Well, Mark would have it now. Yeah, but yeah, and then we daren't forget the bakery. That was a big item. Llewellyn Heffley, first his father had the bakery, and then Lou took it over just a short time because he was a teacher and he preferred teaching. But they had trucks and they came around, even down on the farms. They went to the farms and they would pull up and they would pull out trays. Oh, the smell of the sticky buns and the twists, sugar, and breads and things. And they would they had a weekly route that they went. And then we forgot another store, Elmer Snyder's store in the middle of town. Yeah, that one went out earlier. But, and Elmer had a route that he came around once a week to the farms. And he had some produce that they used, like fresh lemons, which my grandmother always got to make lemonade and iced tea. And he carried all the basics in his truck that the farm women might need. Salt, sugar, tomatoes, things and that. Not too much canned goods, it was almost all of the fresher nature of things. And he came around once. And then there was a huckster that came, a fishman, that came once a week. Now, they traveled not only in the country, but they went through Main Street in Oley too. And he had fresh oysters. He always had a big rubber type apron on when he came. And he had oysters, and he had all kinds of fish and all the things that the women might want. He usually came on the weekend. Fridays was his time that he came through town. And we had all those things that came out to us that we didn't need to go to town, although we did all the time. But
Well, we've come full circle. We didn't mention that Ellie and I are living in Phoebe Burke Retirement Village. And just this summer, they started bringing the hucksters with fresh produce Tuesday and Wednesday morning. So we've come full circle. But when we came down, well, now we came down, it was 53 when we moved to the farm. And Mayor's Bakery came around, and St. Lawrence Dairy came around.
Billy's Pretzels,
Yes,
Charlie's Chips,
yes, so,
all those. And of course, we daren't forget the milkmen.
Yeah.
They came with your milk twice a week. So it was typical rural living.
we also talked about all the old hotels back at Oley Furnace, and the Landakis had the mill,
Mhm.
but they had a hotel there across the street.
Yeah.
And after he died, she kept it up. When we first went down there, that was still,
Yeah.
supposedly it was a speakeasy far enough away from Reading to not be in any trouble. But
Well,
where was Kurtika's Hotels? I found that name. Did that mean anything to you, Kurtika's?
no, that one I don't, unless it went by another
Yeah.
name. The others that I knew of were back at Pikeville. And that, but
Well,
that name doesn't,
You know, but, well, then, I guess it was Jerome Landaki left Oley Furnace and went up to
New Jerusalem. Jerome had his, yes.
And then the
Uh-huh.
one there at 5 Points on,
Oh,
That-
Birdie's. It's Birdie's now.
Birdie's,
but-
yeah.
The one right along the road.
Yeah.
What was the name of that one?
I don't know, maybe that's the one you're thinking
I
of,
don't
the
know if
other
that's
name.
Kurtika's, but,
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
yeah.
Yeah, but there were, yeah. And then back at Landaki's also, there was a lake. And in winter, that was a popular ice skating place.
Well, that was a dam for the mill. wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Mm.
It was the old dame from the mill and that. And that was a very popular ice skating place in the winter, when it was properly frozen.
Well, I think they cut ice from that dam at one point. Is that true, or did somebody just make that up?
I don't know, but they did cut ice down at Bertlett's Mill, down in the lower part of Oley.
Mm.
Because I know that we went there in the summer to get ice for someone that was ill. And they had this big ice house, and it was amazing. It was summertime, and all these big blocks of ice were in there, covered with sawdust, and it was still ice. Of course, transporting it home was another thing.
Wasn't any left till you got home?
No, because they had taken some insulated, you know, the old people had ways that we should have observed more of preserving things like that. Today we have our insulated carriers and stuff, and they had canvas and they put something else under the canvas to hold the ice to get it home. And then we had a wonderful spring house at our farm that my grandfather had modernized and put cement floors and everything. And we put it down in there, bound up in the canvases and things, and we had ice for several days. Yeah. And there's quite a lot of things when you start jogging your memory
Yeah.
that you come up with, that you're just the same. The two of us were on the phone the other night. Actually, we had met before you came to Oley, when you were a friend of Dottie Benevitt's
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
in Reading.
Well, I had a lot of connections.
Steve
with
DeTurk.
Steve DeTurk,
Yeah,
whose mother was, well,
Ella Mangle.
Mangle said he came to Reading High. Oley wasn't good enough for her son to go, so
Yeah,
he and I were in the same class, and my maiden name was Detweiler, and he was DeTurk, and so we sat aside of each other in all our classes.
yeah. Well, we knew Steve good from being in the village. And Steve was a very nice young man, not a reflection of his mother by no means.
Well, she got him to got him an appointment to West Point,
Yeah,
and, but then, I don't like to say he dropped out. I don't know if he dropped out or if he didn't make it, but anyway, he ended
I
up in the
think he-
service,
I
but
think
he
he
didn't
went-
graduate.
I think he went in the service, that's what happened. He may have been drafted too, I'm not sure, but
Well,
he was in the
he went
service.
to West Point right from high school because I
Yeah.
went to visit him one time.
And he was a pilot, so he may have himself joined the Air Force because,
Well, this was still back in, we graduated in 45.
yeah,
So this would have been about in 46 and 47. So that, I mean, it was right after the end of the war, and they were still, people were still, I don't know if they were being drafted, but they were going into the service.
yeah. Well, the Korean War had been then,
Yeah.
and that, but I remember that he was an officer, because we had several boys in Oley that were pilots during World War II. In fact, Alan Turk came and buzzed the town, and he hit the antenna, or I forget what it was, at the church or somewhere. He swiped something.
Lightning rod, maybe.
Huh?
Lightning rod, maybe.
It was something higher, or either from his plane, whatever. He just came a little too low, because they said that would have been a miracle if he crashed into the town. But all I can say is, country life was a wonderful life, and when you reflect on it, and I often wish that the children could experience more of it, and our grandchildren. You talk of things today, and it's totally unknown to them what you're talking about. Sometimes some of us older ladies here get together and we're reminiscing about things, and we say, nobody knows who we're talking about or even the things we're talking about, because they can't picture those things. And there is a lot more, which I learned when I came here. There were a lot more small communities, even in this area, that were farther behind than we were, with poorer people, especially the Depression. When they discussed the Depression here, we realized that we were fortunate that we weren't hit the way a lot of them were.
I know we didn't even think about it, as I said, we moved in the early 50s, and one of the houses we looked at, we didn't even think to ask about the school system because it was over Resca Manor, and they still had one-room schoolhouses in 1953.
Yes.
We couldn't believe it.
Yeah, well, like I said, they would come into art, you know, then.
Yeah.
And the sad part was back in my high school days, I had some classmates that were really great students, and yet they were on a farm. And a lot of them had to leave, not only boys, but girls, had to leave school because they needed them on the farm. They counted on them for labor. And it was just kind of sad. They didn't even get a chance to finish high school, because I'd say by the time we graduated, we had lost at least 15 students. We graduated with 42, so you can imagine how many fell out along the way that they couldn't finish, which was kind of sad. But they didn't promote education in those days. A lot of people were of the opinion that if you went to 8th grade, that was sufficient. You had your education. Now it's time to go in a factory or somewhere else and earn an income to help the family.
But Oley was great that they had the consolidated school. They thought that much because of the Oley Academy.
Yeah.
They had their ideas set higher than some of them other
and
areas.
going back to the Oley Academy, my father and his sister and brother and a lot of my relatives graduated from that academy. And several of them went on to Kutztown then, which was called Normal School at the time.
That was for teachers.
Yeah, and my father went to Franklin and Marshall. But, yeah, they got a really good education, and we did in the Oley school. we could stand up. There were a lot of little contests we got entered in with other schools academically and that, and we had great debating teams. And we had very good teachers, very dedicated teachers. And Mr. Geis's wife was one, and then her sister Marie taught English, and her sister Willi taught in the elementary schools. And they were all dedicated teachers, and they took patience with children that couldn't keep up with the rest of the class. They had enough interest in them to help them. There was no saying you have to go to summer school, you have to get a tutor, nothing like that. I mean, they were there to help you if you needed it. And they were concerned if you weren't making your grades. And so.
You did mention that Mr. Dice was not only the principal of the high school, but he was only a coach in most of the sports. And he went on to become the county superintendent, which for little old Oley was quite an accomplishment.
Yes, yes. Well, a lot of people made fun of him. He was touchy.
Well, he was so serious about it. I mean, I too, you would get thinking, oh, can he end his speech?
Yeah.
And he would keep going and hammering away, but he's got to see, now my three boys, on their own, they probably wouldn't have done it, but they were, all three of them were Eagle Scouts. And he went, most of the boys that went through the Boy Scout and Oley, he got to get to be,
Yeah. And I was a den mother for 5 years for the Cub Scouts. And he worked with us too.
Yeah.
I mean, his interest was really, truly sincere. And the same thing in the church and the Sunday school. He was very active. He supported a lot of things and took an interest in the community in general. He enjoyed everything and was part of it.
well, is there anything else you think of we should talk about? We kind of
No, you're
rattled
doing
on
good.
again.
Yeah, doing excellent. You're-
Is that kind of the thing you wanted us to talk
Yeah.
about? I hope
Whatever
you're
you're
interested
comfortable
at
with.
some point.
Yeah. Well, you go to Oley today, and it's still great. I was fortunate enough to go to the Oley Fair, which was very dear to me. Years ago, it was in my backyard, and I was very active in the fair. But it was great to see that it really is still held and reminds me a lot. It's much larger, a little more commercial, but it still is following the old time with the displays and everything else. And I really, really enjoyed getting there and seeing it all again and seeing how it has been kept up.
Well, it's fun. It still has the principles. You cannot buy anything there. You can
Yeah.
take orders.
Yeah.
But it had to be somebody
It's
in
not
the,
commercialized at all,
Yeah.
no.
You still have the Ringgold Band on Saturday
Yeah.
afternoons, so.
And they're lucky to have them because
Oh.
there's a lot of places don't get them anymore.
everybody wants them.
Well, a lot of places can't afford them, because I've heard that, that they'd like to, but no. But they've carried on those traditions really well, which I think is important. And we can't forget you people and the Heritage Committee. I worked with Phoebe almost from the very beginning. I was on her committees. And we used to do tours. And there's one other thing that came to my mind when I was thinking of this, and I asked my daughter if she remembered it. She said, oh yes. They had the one tour, and then some of us went to Daniel Boone Homestead. We had prepared and cut up all our vegetables and got all our ham cut up and ready. And we went down to Daniel Boone Homestead the night before. And I had conned my husband into going along, setting up the kettles and making the fires and all. And we had some of our daughters with us. we had some sleeping bags, and there was a facility there where we could wash up and change and everything. And so we set up at night, but we got up at an ungodly hour to start the fires and put all the soup together and start cooking. And we were lucky, we had beautiful weather. We slept in the back of our station wagons with sleeping bags. But it was such a neat thing. And then a bunch of the other women had baked homemade bread. And they joined us then before the tour got there. And they had the homemade bean soup and the bread. Somehow there just was no better bean soup than that soup.
Well, that was the start that's how really the heritage started. Phoebe was instrumental with your group at the Women's Club to save the Deterrent House.
Yes.
And I don't know that back in that time.
Now, I have, whether there, I should ask him to bring that box along up when he comes up at Thanksgiving, because I have schedules of some of their early tours in there, and booklets and things, and it's nothing really that my family, yeah, my grandsons on the Keehn side are interested in those things, but it's something that'll get put away somewhere. So what I'll do is I'll go through it and get to you some of those things.
Well, some of those things, but the trouble is that the Heritage doesn't have a place to store this stuff.
No.
And I'm hesitant, like my children are not local, and although they're interested, it's not one of those things they're gonna pass on. I mean, the people that we talked about.
I could give it to my granddaughter that's still here that teaches school and that. I could ask her to hold on to it.
Well, the Historical Society has a lot of that stuff too.
Do they?
But it's, it would be much nicer to have it local.
Yeah, well, that's why I gave you those papers.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw them. It was a little publication that Jim Bauer put out in I think it was 30, 31, and 32. It's really, I made some copies. It's really funny because how they word the things. They reported about a woman sweeping off her porch and all the little things that were happening in Oley. It was a cute little publication when they had it. And my husband had saved these things, and I had dug them out after his death, and then I gave her copies of some of them.
Well, the Boyertown Times used to have, on the back page, they had all the people that had coffins from Boyertown that were made in, I remember there was one, there was a Chinaman in New York City, and they had this listed in the back, the last page of the Boyertown Times had all the people that
Bought coffins.
bought coffins and described as Chinese funeral tribute.
Well, in this publication, it was all kinds of ads, but it was like little quips like, so-and-so went hunting, they got this, so-and-so visited so-and-so in Oley. And it really was fun reading, but the only thing is, nobody knows who the people are anymore, you know.
Well, they had correspondence back at Loboxville, and I remember one of Phoebe Hopkins' daughters visited Stephanie Kindig back in Loboxville.
Oh, yeah.
As if she went on a parade along.
The grist mill, yeah. Yeah, they used to grind some cornmeal. They still made back there that we used to get. But we had, the Women's Club was very active in a lot of things, and I think that's really where this Heritage Committee came out of with Phoebe.
Phoebe got the 99-year lease on the Gottwald property. There was somebody else involved with the Gottwalds, and they have a 99-year lease on
Was it a church house or what?
You know, the association, the Heritage Association, and then from.
Oh, she did so much work.
We did a lot of, yeah. She really got things going.
Oh.
She knew what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
But then from the Heritage, that was in '83, then we got on the National Registry, which was really an accomplishment.
I forget what she called the first committee we had. when we started just doing little village tours and things like that, and started digging up
Well, I
history and
remember
that.
the Oley Fair, the Women's Club always had a demonstration, usually of antiques.
Yes,
Well, that was something when we started they had the fair in school. They had to clean out the school,
and
pack all the stuff away.
my
and
father-in-law
have it,
he would donate plywood. The idea was he would take it up because they push your desks together and lay the plywood on so they could put their displays on. But he would let them use the plywood, and his men took it up and set it up. And then after the fair, they went up and took it back down again. That was the first fairs were in the
Well,
school.
they closed the school, did they close it just Thursday and Friday, or did they
Yeah,
close on Wednesday?
Thursday and Friday.
Okay. Then they moved everything out, then because I know you could still enter the fair on Thursday morning, which was a problem. But I knew, maybe people don't know that when you talk about your father-in-law, that it was the Keehns lumber yard that
Yeah,
you had.
yeah, they provided a lot of the,
Well, they did a
Things
lot
for
of
the
things
fair.
locally, I mean,
yeah.
they try to
But
keep
he,
things local.
But he, yes, they tried to keep, that was the other thing about the fair too, yes. They did concentrate on using the local people for all the needs that they had for the fair. And it,
They still do, yeah.
yeah. Well, I think that's what has made it what it is.
Well, it is truly a community project.
Yes. They've kept it within the community
And they
too.
keep the school children involved, and they probably don't want to be called children, but the juniors
Oh, yes, the
collect
side.
the apples. The apple and cider stand is the only thing that you could sell at, and that's how they made the classes made their money. The juniors had the job of helping set up and
Oh, yes.
collecting the apples
They
and that.
and collected all the jugs, and
Yeah.
we got awake at 5 o'clock in the morning, and there's water running, and I said to my husband, there's water running somewhere. And we got up, and here's all these senior kids in our backyard using town water to wash all their jugs.
No. Then when the mothers always had to get
Well,
baking.
Well, we had another well out back, and my husband went down and he said to Dave, didn't you think to go down and use the other well? We're paying for this water, that's free. And besides, the yard was starting to look like a lake. But kids don't think, but that's the other thing they enjoy. They go out to the orchards, they pick the apples. Like I said, they collect the jugs, they wash them, and it's a wonderful project for them.
You
It
learn a
really
lot.
is.
Yeah.
And then there's all the good baked goods that comes out of it too.
And you come home from working at the fair and the kids say, we're running out of cakes, make us another cake. So you send it half away waiting for it to bake.
Living as close as I did, I got a lot of that. Hey, Mom.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But all in all, they're all such very good memories. We could probably go on and on.
Yeah.
No, we
One
got
thing
3 hours
you have
yet.
something
Huh?
else.
We have 3 hours of time on the,
Yeah, well, we've been talking for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure that there are a lot of things that are of interest to us that may not be of interest to other people.
Yeah.
But,
But I think that a lot of people that don't know the history, the type of history we're talking about Oley, those are the things that have kind of been forgotten. There's historical houses, there's historical farms and places and things, but we more or less are thinking of the people of those times and what it meant to them and to their children. And a lot of, I know a lot of my classmates, their children, no one is in Oley anymore, just like you said, you know. And my son is gone, but his his granddaughter's still there, and now her daughters, and they're active in there. So we have a line of graduations, my father, myself, my son, his daughter, daughters, and now the great-granddaughters are in Oley too.
You're making yourself sound old, though.
Well, they advertise it in the paper on Sunday, so. No, it's all right to get old if you can still get around and have your own mind and that. But it gets sad when you can't keep up with things. Yeah.
Well, I think we're fortunate that Oley has stayed together this long. Some of the other areas, they have dispersed and they didn't have anything to keep them together.
Well, and they spread out too hard, where there's still that grouping in Oley, really, that keeps everybody together. And I'm amazed I look in the paper and I follow all this stuff, and to see all the strange names that are in the community, and that you follow the sports and things, and because you can't help but keep looking to see if anybody's children are in there, and there aren't too many.
But sometimes you can trace some of them back a couple
Yes.
generations.
If they're
If
good
you need
enough
to-
to put maiden names in
Yeah.
with some of them, and that happens to me sometimes in the paper. If I'm reading something and there's a strange name of old classmates and stuff that weren't in my class, but in one of the classes, neighboring classes, and then I look again, and then if I look at the maiden name, but I didn't know their married names. Yeah. We have very few left in our class anymore, of our classmates. And it's sad, and I guess your mother's class too. Most of them are gone too.
Not too many anymore.
No.
Yeah.
And the ones we have aren't that active. We had a reunion 5 years ago, and, no, 4 years ago. And that was the last reunion we had. And we had 6 class members that were able to come to that meeting, and then we decided to.
Well, I think the fair is a big reunion for everybody. They
That
can
is-
organize, but that's when they meet up.
You know, that is the main thing. My granddaughter that's in Maryland, she just wrote and said that she always comes back for the Oley Fair, because that's where they meet their friends and see their friends, because somehow they all go back to the Oley Fair. And not just for the French fries.
Yeah.
But that is a big
Yeah.
thing. That's what everybody talks about. But I don't know.
Well, we have good memories, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the one thing when you get up to be our age. Those are the things that are more precious to you than anything, are the memories that you have, the good memories. It's just like I told a friend not long ago. She was saying something about memories and stuff, and I said, you know what the good part is? Generally, you forget the bad ones. You only hold on to the good ones,
Yeah.
and that's what makes it all worthwhile. Yeah. So,
Well, I think we've rattled on.
is there anything
long
else
enough.
we didn't cover that you want?
I think
I
that's
think
fine.
you did an excellent job, yeah.
Thank you,
You've
ladies.
run out of
We talked a little,
Yeah.
a long time, but
Well, we got it all here, so just about